Etymology and historical origin of the baby name Richard. Richard is a name that came to England in the 11th century by way of the French Normans. It is Germanic in origin and is derived from the nearly synonymous elements Rick meaning powerful and hard meaning strong, hardy, brave. The name was almost immediately adopted by the English and has been one of the most successful of all names. Richard I became King of England in the 12th century. Known as Richard the Lionheart, Richard was the son of King Henry II and the great-great-grandson of William the Conqueror. He is most notable for leading the Third Crusade, the Christians' ultimately unsuccessful attempts to recover the Holy Lands from the Muslims, and achieving folk hero status. Powerful and brave like the name's etymology, Richard the Lionheart helped propel the popularity of the name throughout England. The name has also given birth to several pet forms and nicknames including Rich, Richie, Rick, Ricky, Dick and Dickie. Personality of the boy named Richard. The number 7 personality is deeply mystical and highly in tune with their spirituality. They operate on a different wavelength than the average Joe. Spending time alone comes easily to 7s, as it gives them time to contemplate philosophical, religious, and spiritual ideas in an effort to find real truth. 7s are wise, but often exude mystery as if they are tapped into something the rest of us don't understand. They love the outdoors and are fed by nature. 7s are constantly seeking to understand human nature, our place in the universe, and the mystery of life in general. This makes them quite artistic and poetic, but they are also keen observers with high intellect, so they are equally scientific-minded. 7s are charitable and care deeply about the human condition. Popularity of the boy named Richard. Like William, James, and John, Richard is a name that has enjoyed enduring popularity in the United States for well over 100 years. However, like Robert, Thomas, and Edward, Richard has also been displaying some waning usage since the 21st century. These are highly traditional and age-old English names that are losing some luster within the current naming trends that seem to favor more exotic biblical names, Ethan, Noah, Elijah, Caleb, or surnames as given names, Logan, Landon, Carter, Connor. Some of the conventional boy names, like Richard, have had to step aside to make room. Nevertheless, Richard is a long-standing favorite and so a timeless choice. Powerful and strong like the name's meaning suggests, you just can't go wrong with tradition. Richard is also extremely flexible in terms of nicknames and pet forms, Rich, Rick and Dick, although some parents may shudder at the latter. Richard, Rick and Rich all sound confident and smart. We applaud the parents who maintain tradition in the face of fleeting fads. Quick facts on Richard. Gender, boy. Origin, English. Number of syllables, 2. Ranking popularity, 140. Pronunciation, Richard. Simple meaning, powerful, strong, and brave. Characteristics of Richard. Mystical, intuitive, philosophical, imaginative, eccentric, wise, solitary. Cultural references to the baby name, Richard. Literary characters of the baby name Richard. Richard III is the famous last king of the House of York, who ruled for only 2 years, from 1483 to 1485, but whose fame is eternal. He was immortalized by Shakespeare in his play, Richard III, written about 1591, as the deformed, ambitious murderer of his young nephews, the princes in the Tower, as well as other relatives and enemies. The bad rep he got from the bard has stuck like glue, and there are societies devoted to debunking those stories. We aren't here to settle this centuries-old dispute. Suffice it to say that the Richard III of the stage is completely fascinating, complex, bitter, chameleon-like and brilliant. He is a self-proclaimed villain who makes no bones about his intentions. Power is to be his, but at the same time, he is an almost sympathetic character in the scope of his hunger and thirst for that power and in the seductive way in which he describes it for us. When he declares himself the inevitable product of never having been loved, in fact, of being maligned because of his physical shortcomings, we are almost ready to befriend him. Once power is his, though, he embraces it with malevolent glee, and reveals himself to be a true culprit. The denouement is welcomed, then, as Richard shows his true colors, according to Shakespeare, in his craven last words, forsaking all to the baser wish to live, a horse. A horse. My kingdom for a horse. Richard Halley is a rather minor character in Ayn Rand's 1957 novel, Atlas Shrugged, but a fairly important piece of the big picture. The book was her own avowed favorite of her fiction, and Richard Halley represents the lofty ideal of the utopian combination of art and creation and work, as expounded by the individual in a world grown increasingly dystopian through its enslavement to governmental socialism. Richard is the protagonist's, Dagny Taggart, favorite composer. He has written 4 concerti, and just as he finally achieves astounding success, he disappears. Where is he, and is it possible this new piece of music is truly his 5th concerto? These questions are part of the many questions in the book. It is a mystery of sorts, a science fiction of sorts, and a paean to self-interest and creative individualism, which is embodied by Richard Halley, among others. Lady and is an important character in William Shakespeare's historical play, Richard III, probably written around 1591. And is the beautiful young widow of Prince Edward, the son of the late King Henry VI. She knows that Richard is responsible for their deaths. She stands mourning at the grave of her father-in-law, and she listens to Richard ask her for her hand. And, after very little stalling, she accepts. How to explain this? Many scholars have tried ascribing it to gullibility, fear, ambition, and various other shortcomings, but we're not buying. We think there's just a very big piece of humanity missing from this dame. Well, if ever you doubted karma, look again. It doesn't take the murderous Richard very long before he is looking at another woman and poisoning and to get her out of the way. So she joins hubby and daddy-in-law, and we say she asked for it. An unemployed single mother opens a prosperous business. A penny pincher overcomes his stingy habits. A widow uncovers a creative talent that evolves into a profession. These and other true stories, recounted by Richard Webster in Uriel, demonstrate the impact this powerful archangel has had on countless lives. Known for transforming misfortunes into blessings, Uriel can heal emotional trauma, enhance creativity, enhance prosperity, develop intuition, and bring tranquility. Whether you need spiritual enlightenment, creative inspiration, or prophetic insight, the practical techniques in this book involving meditation, color, music, and crystals can put you in touch with the angel of salvation. Popular songs on Richard. A song by Counting Crows, All My Love, Richard Manuel is Dead, The Last Time I Saw Richard, Richard Cory, Serious Richard, Open the Door Richard, a song by the Counting Crows, Pool Hall Richard, Postcards from Richard Nixon, a song by Joni Mitchell, a song by Vonda Shepard, a song by Ween, Explicit, Mr. Richard Smoker, Dumb Dick, Richard, a song by Elton John, a song by Simon and Garfunkel, a song by Louis Jordan, Richard Manuel is Dead, a song by Kool Moe Dee, a song by The Faces. Famous people named Richard. Richard Burton, actor, Richard Gere, actor, Richard E. Byrd, aviator and polar explorer, Richard Petty, racecar driver, Richard III of England, king, Richard Chamberlain, actor, Richard Strauss, German opera composer, Little Richard, musician, Richard Axel, Nobel Prize winner, medicine, Richard A. Clark, TV personality, Richard A. Cheney, politician, Richard Thompson, musician, Richard II of England, king, Richard Attenborough, actor/director, Richard Francis Burton, explorer. Richard Dreyfuss, actor, Richard Nixon, U.S. President, Richard Harris, actor, Richard Wagner, German opera composer, Richard Carpenter, musician, Richard A. Butkus, football player, Richard I of England, king, Richard Pryor, comic/actor. Historic figures with the name Richard. Obsessed with power, Nixon holds the distinction as the only president ever to resign office. It was that obsession with power that did him in at the end. One of the most experienced politicians to come into the executive office, Richard Milhouse Nixon had already served as a House representative, a U.S. senator and as a vice president under Eisenhower. Yet his management style and general disposition earned him many enemies, and his paranoid personality saw them everywhere. He secretly escalated the war in Vietnam, and when the New York Times reported on some secret bombings, Nixon started wiretapping the Watergate office complex, home to the Democratic National Committee, to uncover the leaks. When this was discovered, the scandal overtook his administration. Nixon would resign as articles of impeachment for obstruction of justice were being prepared in Congress. He is most remembered for the utterance of these 5 words, "I am not a crook."